Last month, I got a call informing me that a beloved man and friend had died. He had had a massive heart attack. And when I spoke to his widow, she was in shock. The three of us were brought together through an effort in the early 1990s to build intentional, multicultural, anti-oppressive congregations. And the two of them, Black UUs who had rarely in their decades of UUism ever encountered another person of African descent, were both pillars in their respective communities. They came out of those communities to be part of our new effort. They met, they fell in love, and they spent their lives together until last month. There were also in that group other Black members from other area congregations, others who were one of one or one of three or one of five who came occasionally. One of them was T.J. Anderson, a renowned composer who was actually on the committee that put together our gray hymnal, an amazing leader whom very few of us know. This little group soon doubled and tripled. It added to its ranks white people and multiracial people such as me. It attracted young men of African descent and mixed-race families, and we all did our best to create church together. We had to write our own bylaws because the standard ones didn't really allow for enough inclusion. We had our own form of worship. For a while, we were in a storefront in downtown Durham, North Carolina, where people who were without homes would come in off the street and worship with us. We had our own forms of religious education. We focused on teaching children hard lessons that don't have easy endings. We focused on talking about what it's like to work across difference, not just once or twice a year, but every time we work together. When people said about UUism, well, we're an all-white denomination, or people like that would never be UU, it was always a puzzlement and a hurt for me, because my experience of Unitarian Universalism from my earliest years was always within that beloved, struggling kind of multiracial community. Black UUs were my teachers, my mentors, my friends. We ate together, we loved one another, and often they took me to task to remind me how my light-skinned privilege made me blind to things they experienced. And I took their lessons with gladness because I knew, growing up as I did, rejected by two xenophobic cultures, that I always knew very little. Josiah Bartlett was the first man to vote in 1775 for independence for colonies on this land, eager to begin this new experiment known as democracy. And this is what he said: just be wrong. Just stand there in your wrongness and be wrong and get used to it. Another Josiah Royce, a 19th century political philosopher, was the first to talk about the idea of beloved community. And he said it was, quote, a spiritual or divine community capable of achieving the highest good as well as the common good. That was a concept that the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would take and expand and expound and call many into its dream. The vision of a society that was inclusive, that we could not know, but which we could imagine. A place where all could truly give of their gifts. In order for us to have beloved community, a network of relationships which says that we are willing to learn about the experience of those who are different than us, we have to be able to see the places where we each need to grow. I have been privileged to count myself as a colleague to the Reverend Dr. Mark Morrison-Reed, who is also a faculty member at Meadville Lombard Theological School where I teach. And since his retirement from congregational ministry, he has devoted his hours to pointing out all the places where our predominantly, but not exclusively, white association, has had amnesia about the contributions of people of African descent. He is noticed by systematically denying the contributions of those Black people who have been there since the earliest days of our faith, centuries ago. We create a false narrative. And by not looking at the ways in which Black people have been treated within our congregations, whatever the intention, we do worse. Are you confused, he asks? The faith that you love has said over and over, sometimes in word, but often in deed, that Black lives don't matter. Mark Morrison-Reed says, we need to think about this. And here in this congregation, we need to think about this. I sit on the Racial Justice Task Force in this county, and I have seen the statistics that tell you in black and white that a Black child is more likely to be arrested for an offense, and then if arrested, more likely to be incarcerated, and then if incarcerated, less likely to be diverted early than a white child who has conducted the same offense in our county. If the parent of one of those children, broken-hearted and in need of comfort, were to come into our doors and encounter us debating whether or not there is systematic racism in our justice system or in any of our institutions, including this church, which are aspirational, but still we don't know how to do this, they would have to back out of our doors in disbelief. This week we're going to mark a year since the 2016 elections. It threw some of us into a chaotic state of unknowing that was not that unfamiliar for others of us. This month last year, some of us were saying, we need to reach out and talk to people who have different beliefs outside of our walls. I said then, and I'll say it again now. We need to talk to people who have different beliefs within our walls as well. We need to do it and be willing to be wrong, because the idea that you can be right all the time is its own cultural madness. Many people have noted with deep sadness that we have retained very few of the visitors who came through our door at that time, though we've retained some pretty good ones, and I see some of you out there. Some have also said that the conversation about white supremacy culture has made and driven people out of our doors. And I'm not surprised at the former, and I know the latter is true. I'm heartbroken over it because I see it as a failure of my ministry. Any religious community, beloved or not, is not a social club. A social club says, this is how we think and act. And if you also think and act in these ways, you may come in and associate with us. A club is static, while religion is dynamic and aspirational. It invites us to reach for the things we don't know how to do, and the places in our world and in our hearts that we know are broken. It compels us to get about the business of fixing them. We have, as Mark Morrison-Reed says, a black hole in our white Unitarian Universalist psyche, and we need, in faith, to address this pernicious form of color blindness. We need to look at the ways that unconscious and unrecognized bias, and I do understand that that is what it is, influence the ways we do what we do here, and we need to be willing to change. The movement for Black lives within our association has given people of African descent in our faith tradition a grounding space. It has given them a place to be held whole and holy, a place where they can be themselves and say their truths without worrying about what someone else is going to say or the critique that is inevitably going to come in other UU spaces. Yes, some people will decide only to participate in those blue spaces, and many others will find the sustenance they need there so that they can remain engaged in our congregations and not leave. As someone who has watched so many members and ministers of color walk out or be sent out of our doors, I need to say this grounding space is vital to our future and vital to our vision as religious people. I am a Unitarian Universalist minister because I believe we inherit a tradition awesome in the true sense of the word. It fills me with awe. And even though I get discouraged, I remember that we are the inheritors of that tradition. I was discouraged yesterday. I was saddened that the conversation about race in this congregation feels raw, by my own failures to hear and listen, by my own fears and hurts around it, because I do value every single member and friend of this congregation. I was saddened by the knowledge of how many have been hurt who have left quietly without saying why they were hurt, though they may have said something to me or one of the other ministers. I was saddened by the knowledge of what it has meant within my own family to have my children witness the differential treatment between their two parents in this culture. Feeling overwhelmed, I did what I often do. I called a 90-plus-old mentor of mine. He's one of those people that when you ask him a question, he's going to give you an answer in about 90 minutes. And in fact, he did. But what I needed was the first sentence he said. He said, "The work of our faith is the transformation of the world, and we can never, never forget that." What can I do, people ask. You can read Mark Morrison-Reed's article, Black Hole in the White Unitarian Universalist Psyche. You can Google Reed College and race and see what's happening there to understand this not just as a struggle in our association, but the struggle of an emerging generation. You can make a donation today to Black Lives of UU, a sacred space that could help heal some of the hurt. You could be willing, as I try to do, to worry less about whether I am right or wrong and more willing to stay engaged. The civil rights movement was about changing laws. Today's justice movement, including the Black Lives Matter movement, is about changing hearts and attitudes and culture, and that is much, much harder work. Our tradition, with its emphasis on love and unity, asks us to step out beyond our comfort zone to the places where we will inevitably be wrong and have to say that we made mistakes. Our work is nothing less than the transformation of our world, and we need all people's gifts and to value all people's experiences, including the Black lives which suffer so much indignity, ill treatment, and inequity in our world today. I need to tell you something about the song that Renoir shared with us, I Need You to Survive. It is sung often in spaces where people of color, UUs, gather. And I have heard that song sung to me by my colleagues at some of the times that I honestly did not think I could go on. Today, as she sang that song, I realized that it is a song for all of us. For me, I need us all, each one of you, to survive. That is my wish, that we may turn shame into curiosity, self-righteousness into humility, escapism into engagement, grateful for the possibility of some time touching that which we aspire so to do. May we be the ones to make it so.